Sick and tired of your love-hate relationship with wine?
Welcome to the Feel It Alcohol-Free podcast. Join us for Dry January with Feel Lit 21. Press your reset button and discover how to feel healthier and freer.
What's in it for you? Every day we bring you actionable advice, heartfelt support, a caring community, and the inspiration you need.
The truth is, it's about progress, not perfection. What if your goal is 21 out of 31 days dry in January? There's no failure, only exploring and learning, and this is what you want, right?
Your alcohol-free adventure starts here. Click the link in the show notes to join us.
Welcome back to the Feel It Alcohol-Free podcast. We are so excited with a very, very special guest today. And this is our first episode for 2025. And we're calling this our 1-year podcast anniversary special episode. And guess who we have? We have Annie Grace with us today. I was so excited. Honored.
So excited. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a little bit of brief bio, and then we're going to dig right in. So Annie Grace is the author and founder of This Naked Mind. She revamped her own relationship with alcohol. She stripped it of its power and changed her beliefs about booze being a reward. And today she's helped millions of people across the globe to do the same. Her approach helps people where rehabs have not. And she's created a brand new revolutionary way to look at the role of alcohol in our lives, establishing a safe place for those who question their drinking but haven't self-diagnosed as alcoholics, and they're stuck in that denial of an incurable disease. So Annie Grace preaches compassion, knowing its power over shame and blame is the best way to achieve lasting change. Annie Grace doesn't teach people how to be sober. She helps them squash their desire to drink in the first place. So welcome, Annie Grace.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah. So we know you really, really well, both Susan and I, as we're This Naked Mind certified coaches. But our listeners may not know, about you. And can you just start by providing a little bit about yourself and your alcohol-free journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. So, for me, it really started pretty not drinking a lot. Like, I didn't drink a lot in college. I went off to my first job in New York City. I still wasn't drinking a lot. I was actually told by my boss at the time that if I was going to be serious about my career, I needed to start showing up at happy hour. And I was like, well, why? I don't drink. And he's like, that's not what it's about. It's about getting your ideas heard. It's about networking. And I was super passionate about my career. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. But I'd also seen people who, were dancing on tables and whatnot. So I had this very methodical approach. I was going to have a glass of wine and a glass of water and try to keep up with all these older men who were in the department at the time. Mm-hmm. And I, would do things like go into the bathroom to throw up that last glass of wine just so I could keep drinking and try to fit in with that Manhattan boozy culture. And pretty slowly, although insidiously, and I don't remember exactly when, drinking at happy hour or at work events for the purpose of work kind of became, well, sounds good to have a drink at home instead of going to put on my running shoes. It sounds like an easy way to cope. And all of a sudden I found myself, drinking most nights, and fast forward a decade, and I was literally drinking every single night, at least 2 bottles of wine per night.
Me too. Yeah, I really relate. Mm-hmm. So then what happened when you started to have this idea that you wanted to quit alcohol? How did you quit? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was going to be super simple and straightforward. I felt like I knew I wasn't an alcoholic, partly because I didn't think I was that bad or one of them, but partly also because a friend of mine who had gone to AA and, declared herself an alcoholic was telling me that I wasn't one, that I didn't drink like her. And so I didn't think that AA was even an option, but I was like, well, if this is starting to cause problems, once I became aware that alcohol was in fact causing problems, that it wasn't the duct tape that I thought was holding everything together, that it was actually like sabotaging me at every turn. That was really painful because I didn't want to admit that. I felt like alcohol was like a very close, dear friend of mine that was, helping me cope with life. And once I realized that like that wasn't entirely true, I was like, yeah, easy. I'll just cut back. I'll just stop drinking as much. And that was not easy. In fact, as I look back on it now, I can very clearly see that the more rules I tried to put in place for myself, the more, willpower I tried to use, the more I tried to beat myself up to stop, the more I tried to like blame myself, tell myself if I just could see how far I had fallen, then for sure I would do something about this, almost scare myself. But the more I would end up drinking over time. It would always work in the very short term, but not in the long term. So I could keep myself those promises for a day or two. But very similar to how I understand dieting, where most people who go on diets actually gain weight. Most people go on multiple diets. That was my relationship with alcohol. It was like I was on this alcohol diet, and every time I would restrict myself, I would boomerang back and I would end up drinking more. And so it actually kicked off this period of a lot of pain for me. I think it was 5 or 6 years where I was sort of in this limbo of, not understanding why things were good in the rest of my life, but this felt so out of control, not understanding why alcohol took so much time in my mental real estate, and just really stopping trusting myself. I was reaching a point where I didn't think I could be relied on because I had one thing to do, which was drink less, and I was failing miserably at that one thing. And so that really shook my sort of self-esteem. I reached a really low spot. I remember coming back from London one day, and I had been drinking that entire week. I'd had a super boozy week. It was, the hangovers left and right, but we're all kind of trying to laugh about it because we're all sort of in it together as coworkers. And I had to wake up early to get my flight back to the US. And I went into the hotel lobby, having stayed up till like 3 a.m. the night before, and asked for a mimosa to kind of like take the edge off, hair of the dog. And the waitress was like, well, I can't give you a mimosa because the champagne isn't open. And I was like, well, okay. And she goes, well, I could give you a vodka and orange juice, which is a screwdriver. And that was one of those like little rules in my mind that if I didn't cross that rule, couldn't have a problem. And one of those rules was no drinking hard alcohol first thing in the morning. But this morning I was very, very desperate. I felt like in a lot of pain, and I did. And I had a few screwdrivers before I went to the airport. And that, I arrived at the airport and I was now hungover and drunk and in so much pain and regret. And I remember sitting down and just writing in my journal, like, I think I'm an alcoholic. And it was just like this weight in my stomach, like just gut wrenching. I felt sick to my stomach. And then there was this other voice, and this other voice was like, wait, let's just find out why. Like, let's just find out why you're drinking more than you used to. Like, why do you need to, why can't you take it or leave it? Why do you feel smart and in control in other areas of your life? But this is the strange exception. And through that other voice, I actually was able to, really start to look at why. I put together a list of all the reasons I drank, and I started like digging into the science. And slowly but surely, every single reason I drank, it didn't hold up. There wasn't actually a good benefit to alcohol, and my drinking started to very naturally decrease. And after about 10, 11 months of that research, I remember telling my husband, like, if you want to drink with me again, this is it, because I'm not going to get drunk anymore. And he was very surprised and couldn't really believe it, but he's like, all right. And we went and we split a bottle of wine. And aside from my alcohol experiment, which we'll probably talk about, that was, it's the last time I drank, and it was over a decade ago now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then you ended up writing the book, This Naked Mind. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that was the catalyst for my journey. I felt so alone. And then I read your book, that very first, for me, like the first in the intro, it's 3:33 in the morning. And I'm laying there in bed, beating myself up, it just, in anguish. I mean, that is how it felt for me. And I just so relate to your entire story because I worked in the corporate and it's just everything. I'm like nodding my head, like, yes, that was me. That was me. So yeah. And if some of our listeners haven't read this Naked Mind book yet, it is phenomenal. But we also want to talk about your new book too. Yeah. So yeah, what would you want to segue into talking about the new book that you've been writing, and it's called Live Naked Alcohol Free, or at least that's what I think it's going to be called.
Yeah, it's Live Naked AF, and it's a joyful first year approach to living alcohol free, and I'm really excited about it. It probably won't be out for a while still because I just finished the first draft, but it's really about everything that comes next. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's really about everything that comes next. So this Naked Mind was really about the mindset shift to actually, leave alcohol in the rearview mirror, and Live Naked AF is how to navigate your life, how to navigate your relationships, how to navigate, the things that come up when life gets lifey, how to deal with sadness and anxiety, how to find more joy in everyday life, all connected to really, reinforcing this idea that living alcohol free is really this badass, amazing decision, not this sad sort of punishment.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what we talk about on our podcast, Feel Lit, Alcohol Free, that actually we feel more lit not drinking, because that's usually a term that people use when they're drinking, right? That they get lit. So we feel more lit not drinking and have more joy not drinking. But that's not what I thought. I was in the same boat as like, oh, this is when in my story, my pastor said, well, if you have a problem with alcohol, you need to go to AA. So that was just like, that was not the answer I was looking for. And exploring that was part of my story and trying to get back to being normal and all that. And so the mindset shift for me, the path was where that mindset shift changed. And the first thing that you said that helped me in the webinar I saw from you was that we are normal if we start to develop a dependence on alcohol, because our brain is doing the normal thing in relationship to an addictive substance. And that just turned everything around for me. So I just want to thank you so much for that. Yeah, and you talk about this in the new book too, is this idea of normal and normies. And I remember that term in AA and I hated that. So before I, saw your webinar and got into the path, my whole goal, even though I was taking tons of breaks, was just to get back to being normal, right? Mm-hmm. And that idea that I'm not normal. There's other normal people, they're normies, and I'm somehow defective. And that I was doing everything in my power to not be that defective person, right? And like you said, when you were just like so upset on the plane ride home, like, oh my God, am I an alcoholic? And so, but you talk about what is this fear that not being normal is coming from, and why is it normal so dangerous in society? You talk about this in the book, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, really fascinating. I actually call it like the tyranny of normal. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, all we have to do is remember or look at any childhood playground to see how painful that idea of like not normal could be. Mm-hmm. I remember, in my childhood, there was like very small high school, very small school district. I basically went from kindergarten through high school with the same 50 kids. And it was not a secret that I had lived in a very alternative lifestyle for the town I lived in. So I lived in this very wealthy zip code, but I lived in a one-room log cabin with no running water, no electricity.
That's right.
So I was like very abnormal according to, standards. And, we didn't even have a shower. There wasn't a toilet or a sink in the house. There were some holes my dad had drilled in the floor of the cabin where we'd heat up water on the stove and pour it over us. And so I didn't feel normal. Well, I felt perfectly normal was the reality until I was told that none of that was normal, right? And I think that's the thing is we don't feel abnormal. We don't feel bad about ourselves. We feel perfectly fine with our circumstances, with whatever it is, until we're told that, hey, like, no, that's not normal. And this is what happens with drinking, right? We look around And we're comparing the insides of ourselves. So how bad we feel, how frustrated we are with ourselves, how much we've been beating ourselves up, how much we feel like a failure. We compare that with the outsides of everybody else, which of course nobody looks like they're struggling. We actually didn't look like we were struggling. I think that's probably true for all three of us, knowing you both pretty well. And so we conclude like we're the problem. We're not normal. And then it actually is completely compounded really by this idea that originated back in 1939. And that's where we can trace this idea of abnormality from. And there's a few things that were written in the big book, which is the text of AA, where, people who they called alcoholics, which the term alcoholic is not medically used. It's not scientifically used. There's no definitive definition in either the medical or scientific community. It's often told that you have to figure that out for yourself. It's passed around. Like my friend said to me, like, oh, you're not an alcoholic. Someone else might say, I am an alcoholic. Some of the reviews on my book are like, this wasn't written by a real alcoholic, therefore it's invalid. I mean, it's just such a nebulous term, right? But where it came from was really AA. And what happened was in the big book, it's actually, this is a quote. It says, the alcoholic is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. It says, we alcoholics are abnormal drinkers. And the delusion that we alcoholics are like other people has to be smashed. And then that whole paradigm has been adapted to this idea of normies. And the term normies has been, popularized as people who have this normal relationship with alcohol. And AA, even the big book even goes so far as to describe everyone who can't drink, quote, normally as, quote, the unfortunates. And so it's like, it's what are we supposed to think, right? We already know it's incredibly painful to feel abnormal or to feel like things are sort of like we don't fit in, but then to feel as if, that the punishment for that is meetings for the rest of our life and, really being in that incredible amount of pain.
Yeah.
It can be really, really hard.
And we're seeing it's normal on television, movies, everywhere, right? It's like this everyone, everywhere concept of normal. And yet, I love what you said, Annie, like we don't know what's in everybody's head. I mean, everybody saw me as just a normal person. I had a corporate job, worked really hard. I was able to show up every day, do my job. Yet in my head, I knew that I was suffering. But I was in denial. I don't know if you guys were too, but like, I remember I would wake up feeling like total crap, but I would be like, I'm okay. I can do this. I'm fine. I'm normal.
Well, the pain is so hard. That's why we all became coaches or do what we do, is because we know how much pain we were in. And then I figure so many people are in the same. I would cry on the way to work and then be like halfway there and go, okay, suck it up, Susan. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got to, get with it. You got to get in there and like do your thing, and then get through the day, and then on the way home swing by the liquor store, and it's so frustrating. And to think that then again, that we're not normal. We don't know what people do behind closed doors. Everyone saw me drink 2 glasses of wine when I was out in public, but they didn't know that, I drank the rest of the bottle at home,
Yeah.
So, and we don't know that, the highlight reel of everyone's life, that we see on Facebook and Instagram and so many places now. And so it's really hard. And you mentioned something in the book too, that, the science is what set me free, to be honest. And one of the things that you mentioned is that our subconscious brain is 7 seconds faster than our prefrontal cortex or our thinking brain. And I feel like, that helps me help clients so much, but it also explains why you can literally be driving home saying, I'm not going to drink, get home, and you're ripping the cork out with your teeth and pouring a glass and drinking it and just be like, what am I doing? And I hear that from clients so much. They're like, why am I doing this? What is going on? So how do we reprogram, or how do we beat that 7 seconds, right?
Yeah, I love that question. It's so fascinating because a big part of that is is that, so there's a principle in neurology, and it's basically called Hebb's law. And it says that neurons that fire together wire together, which in short means that everything that you have been doing habitually when it comes to drinking, or frankly, any other habit, gets wired into your brain, actually in the gray matter of your brain, as sort of a superhighway for that thing. And it's not just the act itself, it's everything that precedes it. So if you're driving by the liquor store and you've done that 1,000 times, and every time you've pulled in, your brain is actually thinking that that's what's going to happen. And so it's overcompensating, and it's releasing these chemicals that's preparing your brain for the alcohol that you're going to drink. It's trying to keep you safe. It's actually like an immune defense. It's saying, here, I'm going to prepare for this ahead of time. And so when you all of a sudden switch up your routine and you don't stop at the liquor store, you have all of these chemicals that have flooded into the brain saying, hey, I'm preparing for this. You don't add the alcohol, the brain just freaks out. And it feels like this very intense emotional craving, because the very long and short of any addictive behavior is that through an overstimulation of the dopamine response, your brain has basically gotten confused to think that thing that you just did, that drink you just had, or alcohol in general, is necessary for survival. And so your brain is literally so confused that it thinks this is needed for survival. So now you have this perfect storm of this chemical kind of chaos because of the overcompensation, plus the brain's thought pattern that, like, at an emotional level, I need alcohol to survive. And so you're struck with this intense craving before you even have any conscious thoughts. And it's like, then you have this like F it button, and people will be like, I don't even know how this happened.
Yeah.
I don't even understand what went on. Well, other studies show that when somebody's in the middle of a craving like that, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's like the CEO part of the brain, the part that makes good decisions for later, the part that can delay gratification, the part that can, sit with discomfort, it goes completely offline in MRIs. So during a craving, the part of your brain that is actually the only part that can sort of say, I'm not going to do this now for the benefit later, it is hijacked. And so we're dealing with this, actual chemical hijacking of the brain, which manifests in these cravings and these emotions. So how do we handle it? I mean, the main thing is just awareness of what's happening, because we're not like mice. If you see that that's a trap, and you see that when you drive by the liquor store, you're flooded with this like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be okay tonight. I have to go back. This doesn't feel good. What's wrong? Because this feeling has arisen in your body. And what chases that feeling is this barrage of thoughts about needing alcohol. You don't have to say, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm never going to get out of this. This is such a problem. You can say, oh, this is predictable. This is exactly what the brain is going to do, right? And this is exactly, and that's why it's so helpful to work with a coach, because they know exactly what's going to happen. They can say, you're going to drive by the liquor store. You're going to be flooded with these emotions. You're going to pull over and you're going to call me, right? Or we're going to, you're going to send me a voice memo, or we're going to, whatever, you're going to do this meditation, and equip people with the skills, because we're not mice. We don't have to fall into these traps of chemistry once we see them. We're like incredibly strong, powerful people. It's just that we don't always see what's happening. And especially with that 7 seconds of abject panic, because your body's saying, I need something to survive. Like if you think of that, and you're like 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000.
It's a long time.
That is a long time to feel like, if I don't get that thing, I'm going to die. And I know that feels overly dramatic, but it's not. Like, that's what's chemically happening in the brain during a craving, is your brain is saying, if I don't get that, I will die. Until your logical mind can catch on and be like, wait, nobody's dying.
Not going to die.
It's got to be okay.
Kill me. Yeah.
Yeah. I just went through this with a client who has this problem with Trader Joe's. She's like, well, I walk in, and I said, let's just walk through Trader Joe's then. She's like, the flowers are here. The produce is no problem. It's when I go through the meat and the charcuterie section, and then the wine section's there. And that's when it starts. And I go, okay. But I think awareness, just being aware, like, okay, I'm going into the section. And like, I think you'll be okay. But then we also talked about strategies she could use during that time. And one of them was, yes, WhatsApp me. And also, what are you going to buy that's different? Like tapping into the joy in that section. Like you're going to buy the super expensive stinky cheese that you really want to try instead. But I think sometimes just awareness, and we talk about awareness so much on our podcast, that's the key. Once you're aware, it's almost like you have a little bit more control over it because you go, oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. There's that feeling. Oh, it's because I'm in the charcuterie section, and you can kind of not laugh it off, but just the awareness of like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be okay. So,
awareness and curiosity and self-compassion. Like every single episode, we talk about those three keys because it's so important. And what's different about this Naked Mind methodology and the ALP methodology? We'll ask more questions about ALP in a second. But what do you think, Annie, is like so different about your approaches versus we mentioned AA or like rehab? What is so different?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to comment quickly and give like a really tangible story for that Trader Joe's situation is, think of it this way. Like if you're invited to a birthday party and they bring out this great looking cake, and you're trying to eat a little less sugar, but you love cake, you're going to crave the cake, right? You're going to look at that cake and be like, okay. And you're going to have to think, do I want to have the cake? Do I not want to have the cake? What am I doing today? Maybe I'll have a little cake, but there's going to be some sort of a craving. Now, I have walked through the bakery section of the grocery store and I have never craved cake.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's a totally different psychological association. A, I'm not eating the cake in the bakery section. B, there's no celebration, which has been tied into the whole thing. So I'm not like attaching the sugar to celebration and togetherness. So all these psychological meanings aren't there. But what a shocking display of how that Trader Joe's situation was so tied in because of all of her experiences. I'm pampering myself. It's the wine and cheese. I'm taking care of myself. Like, I always buy it here and then my brain knows I'm going to have it later, like within a short period of time. And if we just contrast that to like, walking through a place she's never bought liquor before, some like warehouse with, cases of wine, she'd have no craving. It's just because the circumstances and the meanings we've created over time. And the great thing about that is like, you just have to interrupt it once. So Susan, your coaching is just like spot on because if she can just interrupt it once, the next time won't be a 10 out of 10 craving. It will be a 2 out of 10. It's just like have to interrupt it once. So anyway, I forgot your question already. I'm sorry. That was
so just the approach of this Naked Mind, because we touched briefly on like AA and, willpower and rules. And, how does this Naked Mind or ALP methodology differ from, say, AA and rehab programs, the medical model? Yeah. So
the best way that I've really found to explain this is this idea of order of operations. I know it sounds kind of weird, like 6th grade math, but basically what it is we can all go back and sort of think about, our math classes. I have 2 teenage boys and they're always doing math at the dinner table. And so when we think about our math classes, we think of order of operations, which is basically like, I learned at PEMDAS, which is the parentheses come first, then the exponents, then multiplication and division, and on and on. And I started thinking like, well, wait a second. Why is it that this Naked Minds methodology and ALP, affective liminal psychology, kind of the science that I've put into the world, why is it when we run these efficacy studies, it's not even on the same planet as the efficacy of the existing methodologies? So for example, you can find efficacy studies for AA, which is like maybe if they're generous, they'll say 7% of people might end up being in long-term recovery, but usually it's less than that. Studies for rehab, on average, we're talking 3 to 4% of people actually go into. But when we do studies with this Naked Mind and the methodology you all have been trained in, 54% of people drink less after coming into contact with our thinking and our methodology.
It works.
Yeah, and then 54% stop drinking and 36% drink less. So the majority stop drinking and then 36 drink less. So it's 90%. And I was like, okay, well, why is that? And this kind of epiphany was, well, maybe the order of operations is wrong. And so I was like, okay, like I think our existing recovery order of operations goes like this. It's behavior first, then judgment, then negative emotion. So you can think of it as BN or BJNE, right? Like just like, it's not as cute as PEMDAS, but behavior first. Like we're so all about the behavior.
Just stop.
And
yeah.
Just stop. And when I was doing that to myself for those 6 years, like I was literally at the lowest point in my life. I was hysterical in that tunnel underneath the airport in Heathrow, London. It was the first time I'd ever drank vodka in the morning. I had that rule in my head that said, if you don't drink hard alcohol, you don't have a problem. But now I did have a problem because I was drinking hard alcohol. Funny fact, that rule also said, but don't worry, you're okay if you drink mimosas till you puke. That's not a problem. But it was like one of those things.
I had those rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there I was, and like, I didn't know what to do because I had one job, which was to stop the behavior, to stop drinking. And I couldn't do that one job. I couldn't do that one thing. And that behavior, me being unable to do that because I didn't know that alcohol was tangled up in my brain for as needing it to survive. I didn't have that information about the chemistry and how strong and serious cravings are and how, human beings, like our brains go offline when they're happening to us. Like I didn't know why behavior was so hard. I just thought something was wrong with me. I wasn't normal. I was a problem. I was broken. And the shame and despair, they were just like crushing. I felt like I was only worthy if I wasn't drinking, and I was drinking. I couldn't do that one thing. So I just wasn't worthy. And in that tunnel, that voice that asked like, why? It was like, just wait a second, like just take a break. Like this, just find out why, like you're more than your behavior. And I really took that voice very seriously. And over that next year, I switched my order of operations and I put grace first. And grace first was, really the only thing that can actually have me be curious. So Ruby, as you're saying, it's a grace, curiosity, compassion, these things. Like I was like, well, I can't afford to have grace for myself because I've been like a disaster. Like you don't understand, like just a little bit more drinking is going to send me, like, I can't do it. I can't afford to have grace for myself. But then there was this other, like, this dialogue I'm having in my brain. And it was like, well, the definition of insanity is we've been trying it this way for 6 years and it hasn't worked. So why don't we try this other way? And it was like, if you can't have grace, you can't be curious. If you can't be curious, you can't know why. If you can't know why, you're not going to be able to change this. Like, let's just use logic here. And so for the first time, I kind of stepped out of this shame where we can't have shame, and that negative emotion is so reactive. It's so strong. It's so intense. We can't think logically. We can't think with our prefrontal cortex. It's offline. And so I said, okay, like what if it was different? What if the order of operations was grace first, which awakens curiosity, which creates positive emotion, which then, of course, would change my behavior? Because there's no doubt, like, behavior is the thing we need to change. But the reality is that, like, behavior might be the metric of success, but it's not what needs to come first in order of how to change it. And, when we put our behavior first, like, very predictable things happen. We judge ourselves based on our behavior as worthy or unworthy. That judgment leads to a shame spiral that can result in even multi-day benders or really shameful drinking that causes huge problems in our life. That creates negative emotion and more shame. We use that as a weapon against ourselves. That drives us to drink. Our brains have been programmed to crave a drink when we're in pain. There's few things more painful than that internal conflict, and on and on.
Yeah.
And like, and then when we switch to grace first, like a totally different set of things happen, right? When we start asking why, we start to, it gets quiet enough in our own heads for us to like think, and we can be curious and compassionate about our own experience. We can be like, well, why do I feel smart and in control everywhere else, but this is the one exception? Like, why did I used to take it or leave it? Now I have to have it. And why does anybody drink anyway? And what is an alcoholic? Is my brain actually different? How is it different? Is it chemically different? What does alcohol do in the body? Does it create peace that I think it is? Or does it release adrenaline and cortisol, which is the truth of it? Does it give me joy, or does it numb my ability to feel joy, which is the truth of it, right? And we get curious, that can create this positive emotion. And when that positive emotion happens, like, the behavior changes. And I've asked this to people. I say, just do a challenge, right? Take behavior, make it not your goal. I don't want your drinking to be your goal. I don't even want it to be what you think about. What I want you to do is every time you drink or don't drink for the next 30 days, I want you to be kind to yourself and curious about why you did it.
Yeah.
Do that for 30 days and commit to it and tell me if your drinking goes up or down. And inevitably, that's why the success rate is 90% of people drink less or stop drinking. The drinking goes down. It's just like predictable. It's just how the brain works. And I know I'm just like off on a tear about this, but the last thing that I'll say about like why it's so different is I remember this just being embodied so well. I was at an event, and it was a Byron Katie event, and her daughter Roxanne had a really problematic relationship with alcohol when she was much younger. And, like Roxanne was talking to her mom about like how she ended up moving through that. And one of the things that Byron Katie, Roxanne's mom, had done is she never saw Roxanne as bad or broken. She made sure that Roxanne knew that her behavior, her drinking, was not tied into her worthiness, right? She saw perfection in her daughter. She saw a woman she was privileged to call her daughter. She felt love without expectation of change. And so Roxanne turned to her mom with tears in her eyes and she said, "You saw me as good, so I knew I must be good." And that's when I started to get sober. And that's how I healed. Because like the truth of it is, and I know you guys know this better than most people because of what you do for a living, but like we can't break ourselves whole. Like we can't do it. And when we try to do it, that's the paradigm right now is how much can we break ourselves down? How much can we admit we're powerless? How much can we try to break ourselves whole? And then we wonder why we have these success rates. Well, if you get the order of operations wrong, you get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find coaching in your path programs and the alcohol experiment that what I found is this seems like a lot of people that end up drinking heavily have this, we call it like a big belief, the tree trunk belief, of like unworthiness or I'm unlovable. And, the first year in the alcohol-free journey is a lot about just your like figuring out yourself and having that compassion, curiosity, awareness. But then that second year, that's where I really worked on relationships, that deep relationship with myself too, deeper, and really figuring out this core belief that I was broken or unlovable or unworthy. And that took time. This takes time to really rewire your brain and really find that deep self-love. And I love that just everything you put out into the world, Annie, because the science and the compassion and that you're not alone, like all of this is just, it's so beautiful. You're impacting so many millions of lives. I want you to know,
thank you. And I think that's the thing that I asked you guys actually were some of the people I asked for this book. You were some of my co-authors. And I asked, what was most surprising about your first year alcohol free? And this was the most surprising thing for me too. It was, it's the first step on the journey, right? Everything starts to happen. Life starts to happen after the bottle. Yeah. And it's really the first step. And the reason it's the first step is because over and over, people would say, I just didn't know who I was. And I have had the joy of rediscovering me, rediscovering, the little 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 12-year-old Ruby and the little 9, 10, 11-year-old Susan and like what really lights us up and who we really are in the world before we started believing things that caused us to believe we weren't worthy. And like that journey is so beautiful and so profound. And it's so amazing to watch so many women, especially, wake up to our own power in this and our own knowledge of ourselves and our own internal wisdom and intuition. And, when I was really writing affective liminal psychology, it was so clear to me that, any addiction, whether it's scrolling to alcohol, to work, to, anything, it's us trying to medicate a disconnection with self and a disconnection with who our most authentic things, us trying to live in ways that are not true and authentic to us. And if there's one thing I think the world needs more than anything else, it's more people who are living in the most truest and authentic way. And so I think that this work is so much more profound than that, because at the end of the day, it's not really about the alcohol, right? It's about rediscovering who we are. Yeah, and that's been the most surprising thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. Figure our heart and our mind out. And I remember, because I did your PATH program, the PATH in its iteration now, the original year, 2020. And I remember about 9 months in starting to feel good about myself. But it was such a foreign feeling. Like I was like, and I use this word, which is such a high school word. I'm like, am I conceited? I just feel like it just felt wrong to even feel good about yourself. How terrible is that? Like, so how ingrained in me was feeling bad about myself? Like, I think when you say 8 or 9 year old, I think I have to go really way back to like maybe even before 3 years old of am I feeling good about myself? So it's been a journey for me. Feeling bad about myself was more my comfort zone. And so it was a hard thing to break, but ditching alcohol was the first step, absolutely, to the journey of authenticity, which is a beautiful thing, especially for women, because I feel like we live in this unworthy place and feel like we have to hustle for our worthiness and do and produce instead of just be. Like, I still struggle with just being, but I'm working on it.
Me too.
Yeah, taking up more space, playing big in life instead of playing small, which is what I was doing when I was drinking. Yeah.
And I love your formulas. Like, even though I'm not a math person, I've always been terrible at math.
I'm not a math person.
My dad's a math teacher. So my dad was always, Susan, like, how do you not get this? And I'm like, I don't know, but a formula though, like, emotion, repetition, authority, or just But if I can grab onto a formula that it's like, I can put that in my brain and go, okay, just do it this. So when you were mentioning the order of operations, that just cracked me up, because I was like, I needed an acronym, because I still can't do math. But, and I love the emotion, repetition, authority, and how important positive emotion is. Like you said, we can't break ourselves better. We cannot hate ourselves to a better place. When you put that in a formula, that just makes sense. But that's just what we're taught. Like, beat yourself up a little bit more. I feel like I have a black belt in beating myself up. And it's like, just whip yourself into shape, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and it's like, that just doesn't work. And when you try something new, different, then you start to see it work. And then that positive emotion around that, and the importance of celebration, which is another thing we don't do, is just, this is what we talk about on the podcast. And we're just so grateful for you, because you're what started it all for both of us.
I know. I have a really fun question for you, Annie, okay. So what's one thing on your bucket list, and why is that important to you?
Well, I really want to hit the New York Times bestseller list. It's on my bucket list.
Okay.
And it's so funny, because it's such like a petty thing in a way, but like, it's not. I've sold more books than most books, like the vast majority that are published on that list, because I've sold over 1 million copies of This Naked Mind, and that's like this way elite group, way beyond New York Times bestseller. However, because it's like such a thing, and it's such like a trendy thing, and you have to do it in these specific ways, it's just one of those things that I want to do. I think that would be great, just to get the work in the hands of more people. But on a personal level, I've always just wanted to go and live for a week or two on a sailboat with my family. So I keep angling for that every summer. But my daughter, she's still only 7. So we're like, would it be fun? Would she just be crawling the walls? But I want to make that happen. But my older son, he's 16. So I've got to do it sooner than later.
Yeah. Oh, that would be amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. And speaking of New York Best Time Sell, like, what are you reading right now that is like something that's impacted you and that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'm actually reading a really interesting book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. Certainly not, one of the best-selling book, kind of a obscure book, but really fascinating about just kind of integrating our emotional experiences with this process that he's created. So I really enjoyed that. And I'm loving it.
Awesome.
That's great.
So I'm privy to the fact that as we're recording this, so we're recording this in the beginning of December, and you're having your 10-year alcohol-free anniversary next week.
Yes. Yeah.
And speaking of celebrations, because it's so important to celebrate milestones, like how are you going to celebrate? Yeah.
That's so interesting. I so don't think about that as a milestone even, because it felt so effortless and easy. I had to go back and like look up the date. So more than likely it will pass completely uneventfully. But and it's just it's not because it's not amazing. It's just because I don't know. It's so small and irrelevant that it's just completely irrelevant. It would be like celebrating the day I gave up mayonnaise.
Yeah.
Stop drinking, regular soda.
When
whatever.
did it become effortless? Because like in your book, you mention that it's longer. Like I think it was Dowsett Johnson was saying it took like 5 years, or I just celebrated my about 6 months ago, my 5-year anniversary, and I think it's completely small and irrelevant. But when did that shift happen?
It's interesting because I think I did my work ahead of time. So I think I have a unique experience with this naked mind of I was the one who read through every single study, and I was the one who spent the entire year reading and rereading and, just internalizing that information. So I felt like alcohol was mostly irrelevant almost immediately. I did have one instance, which was about 3 months after I stopped drinking. It was in March. And I know this because it was St. Patrick's Day and we were sitting around the table and we had this dinner party and some friends were drinking these green beers. And I was like, oh, I think I overreacted. I didn't know I was going to write a book at that point, by the way. I had just done the research for myself, but it was in these kind of messy PDFs. And I had started to share it with people, and people were like, you should make this a book. And I was like, I should. And they're like, yes. And so I ended up self-publishing. But so I didn't intend to do this for a living. I just was like a human who had decided alcohol sucks. And then I was like, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I overreacted. But I didn't want to get, drunk that night because I knew about the coupling in the brain of enjoyable experiences, socialization, and, that Hebb's law. Those things were firing together. I was drinking at every single social event, so they wired together. And so I decided I was going to do what I called the alcohol experiment. It was a very original alcohol experiment. And I locked myself in my bedroom with 2 bottles of wine. I set myself in front of a curtain. I turned my iPhone on and I recorded myself getting drunk. And I thought that it was going to be fun and interesting. I thought I was going to get drunk and then want to go downstairs and hang out. The reality was I couldn't even watch the videos for 4 years. It took me a long time to, now there's a 16-minute video on day 8 of the alcohol experiment that is an edited down of the 4 hours of footage. And it took me a long time to get that together because of how painful it was, but there was nothing about alcohol by itself that was enjoyable to me. It was honestly like the edges of the room started to get a little bit blurry. I started to feel slightly dizzy, a little lightheaded. That lasted for maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't even that great. And then I just felt in a bad mood. And I started yelling at my kids. I was yelling at my dog. You could see the light go out of my eyes. It was shocking. I didn't even have to watch the video, but it was so shocking how little alcohol actually does and how much it was all placebo from the things I'd coupled with it that I was free after that. There's never been a moment where I've let's have a drink. It just has never sounded good after that experiment. But I had to experience that viscerally, talk about how to change the subconscious emotion. All the emotion was there, repetition. I had done that for so many years that my repetition of how being drunk felt, it all came back, right? It was like, oh, this sucks. And then, I was my own best authority. Our experience is our own best authority. And so I know it's not always what people do, but for me, it was really immediate.
Yeah. That light in the eye, really, really strikes me. I just remember, and I can see it when other people drink now. It's like a veil goes over their eyes or something, and people change personalities, or they're just not, their light is not there, And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and when I was drunk and just like asking, who am I? I just couldn't recognize myself when I was drinking.
Yeah. When I've given this exercise to clients, usually every time they come back and go, that was painful. I did not like that. Wow. I learned so much. And, Ruby, you use it also as the mindful drinking exercise with the journaling and how do you feel and when do you want the next drink and recording yourself too. Yeah. Yeah. It's so powerful because when we have that visceral bodily experience, that's everything, right? That is how it changes everything. And I didn't do that, but I feel like I did it before I started the path because I had been kind of almost alcohol free in 2019 up until COVID 2020 March. And then I just threw everything out the window, started drinking from a coffee mug like everyone else. Yeah. But because I had the contrast of how it felt mostly in 2019 when I was doing many 30, 60 days and then kind of trying to get back to normal and drinking in between. But then when I just just no beholds barred and just went back to regular old drinking, and it took me a couple months of that and then just realizing, this is awful, and how much it exacerbated my anxiety and depression. And I was all in it took me, I think I was about 200 days when all of a sudden it was like, this is in the path. Like, yep, I'm not going back. At first, you don't put forever on the table, right? That's a little too daunting. So the first one was 100 days. Then I'm like, okay, if I do another 100, it'll be right before Christmas. Okay. And then once I got there, it was like never going back. And that became, small and irrelevant. And that doesn't mean there aren't challenges. There's vacations. You have the resources and the tools to get through the challenges. And when you really are like, I really don't want to drink, but why? Yeah. So, I sometimes say it's not easy, but it's nothing that you can't do. Just like when you go to the gym and they're like, okay, that one extra squat, it's not easy, but it's hard, but doable. Right. Yeah. And it's worth it because that extra squat is the one that really, increases your strength. Right. So. Yeah. So good. So good.
So alcohol freedom, we feel lit. And Annie, I really want to know, what do you do to feel lit alcohol free?
I love reading and thinking and talking about what I'm reading and thinking. Mm-hmm. So I think probably those things, like having really thoughtful conversations with friends. I think that is like the best drugs for me, for sure.
Oh, I love it too. Yeah.
I actually thought, if you guys don't mind, I thought of something while we were talking that I'd love to give your listeners, which is I'm going to throw up the first 9 chapters of the new book because I know it's not going to be out for like almost a year. And we'll have that available at Live Naked AF just for free. So people can get an early peek.
Yeah. Well, I've already benefited from reading the first 9 chapters. So thank you so much for the sneak preview for us coaches. And this is so amazing.
What a nice gift. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to share? Like what's happening with you in January or This Naked Mind? Feel free to give us a shout right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to do a live 5-day Control Alcohol in 2025 challenge where I go deep into the reasons we've been stuck, why it's buried in our subconscious, how we can get back in control in 2025. So we don't know how much tickets will be yet. We don't know any of the details, but I'm sure we'll give you a link before this goes live. And it's going to be definitely in January.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this gift for our listeners. And thank you so much for joining us for the Feel It Alcohol Free podcast. Susan and I are just forever grateful for you and your book and what you're doing in the world. Thank you so much.
We've benefited so much from your passion of reading and talking about what you're reading and getting excited about it,
And the
because you
science.
take all that and you've created so many wonderful programs for the world. And I'm looking forward to even more in this book.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This was a really fun way to spend some time this morning. So,
Oh, it was awesome. Thank you, Annie. Join us for Dry January with Feel Lit 21. Press your reset button and discover how to feel healthier and freer.
What's in it for you? Every day we bring you actionable advice, heartfelt support, a caring community, and the inspiration you need.
The truth is, it's about progress, not perfection. What if your goal is 21 out of 31 days dry in January? There's no failure, only exploring and learning, and this is what you want, right?
Your alcohol-free adventure starts here. Click the link in the show notes to join us.
Thanks so much for listening to Feel Lit Alcohol Free Podcast. Do you have a question you'd like us to answer on the show?
All you need to do is head over to Apple Podcasts and do 2 simple things. Leave a rating and review telling us what you think of the show. And in that review, ask us any questions you have about breaking free from wine or living an alcohol-free lifestyle.
That's it. Then tune in to hear your question answered live.
And remember, do something today that will help you feel lit.